so excited to chat. You're doing some really badass things.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for reaching out. It's always a pleasure and an honor when folks reach out to have me on their podcast to share about the work that I'm doing, which is unfortunately, and I say unfortunately, it's not popular work that gets enough visibility on social media. It's not supposed to be popular or trendy work. It's hard work that a
Yes.
lot of people don't want to hear, you know?
Yes. Oh yeah, I always say I have a very unpopular opinion and I'm gonna say it anyways.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yes. Well, can you introduce yourself? Tell us who you are, what you do.
Um, I am Hortencia Jiménez. I am a queer Mexican immigrant, sociology professor, and I live in Monterey County in Salinas, California.
Hmm, nice. I am also from California. How do you like California?
I live in the Central Coast.
Mhm.
I love it. I love the weather. I live in an agriculture community, and I'm privileged to say that I have access to the beach only 25 minutes from here. So I feel like I have the best of everything.
Yes, I miss the beach. I miss the California coast for sure. It's a very
We're,
different vibe than Washington and Oregon.
oh yeah, absolutely. Where are you located?
We're up in Spokane, Washington. So
Oh,
it's
okay.
like people know Seattle and then you
Hmm.
drive a straight line across the state and
Hmm.
we're 20 minutes from Idaho. So we're right on the Idaho border.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
Mhm.
you are. I hope that you
Yeah.
take some trips.
Yeah, we do. I do a lot of like hiking and backpacking and biking up here because it's very mountainous. We're super
Oh,
close to Canada, so
yeah,
very
love
privileged
that.
in that way.
Spending time in nature is so important for well-being.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So I let's dive into the unpopular work that you do, which I think is so important and should be much more prominent. So can you share a little bit about what you do in that space, how you got into it, how your own story informs the important work you
Yeah.
do?
Wow. I don't know how long we have for these two questions.
I know.
Um, let's start off with how did I start the work and why am I doing this work? So I have always been involved in the community. Always. I'm a sociologist. I feel like I was born to be a sociologist, very community oriented individual. And so when the pandemic hit, there was a lot of changes. And I've never been a social media person. I had a Facebook, but I didn't post too much. And then with the pandemic, I felt the need to create an account on social media, on Instagram, to share information and knowledge. That was scary, and it's still scary because it's out of my comfort zone. And when I
Mhm.
started, I noticed a lack of representation, and me being a sociologist and doing content research, it's like, wait, where are like the women of color, like health
Mhm.
coaches doing like undieting work? And I realized that there was a lack of representation. And one of the first accounts that I came out that I saw was Dalina Soto. So shout out to your Latina nutritionist. She was the
Mhm.
first Latina account that I started following. And slowly I started seeing other women of color, specifically Black women, dietitians and nutritionists. And that's really where my intentionality centered in really uplifting our culture foods, specifically me being Mexican and, Latina,
Mhm.
was very important to be part of those conversations that other women of color were having about really challenging the wellness industry and challenging diet culture, that it's enough to stop vilifying our culture foods and also to have a more broader understanding of food and the impact that food has not only in our lives but like in the community. So I really look up to a lot of the women of color who have been paving the way in social media for me to show up.
Mm,
Uh, and when I say to show up raw in my authentic self, because, there's not that many of us doing this work. And I say that it's unpopular because who wants to hear, like, stop dieting? Everyone wants to diet, have, quote, this, the beach body, have, the thinness, everything that we have been conditioned and socialized. I understand. So that's when I say that this is not a popular work or trendy work, but is longevity, right? It's a
mm,
long-term sustainable work that we're here for the long run, that it's my passion and it's a conviction. And it impacts my life, the life of my community, the life of my students. That's why I'm here. And
mhm,
I'm here to answer the second part of your question is I've been impacted by diet culture. And I want to begin by always saying that, like, the levels of privilege that I have. And when I say by privilege, as a sociologist, like unearned social identities that I have because of our society. So being thin, genetically, my dad was tall and thin, so I
mm,
come so I come from a from family members who are thin. So I live in a thin body, and that is a privilege because my body is this societal norm, right? And it's not my fault, but I have privilege and I have a level of responsibility because of this social identity. While I have privilege because of my thinness and being cisgender, I also have marginalized identities for being queer, for being an immigrant, English being my second language. So, like, I'm also here to say that we can have both, and it's important to recognize both our privileged social identities and our marginalized. So, the fact that I've been thin doesn't mean that I haven't been body shamed. I haven't experienced the same amount of fat phobia, but I grew up hearing fat phobic comments, but it doesn't impact the way that it impacts women in larger bodies. So I have a responsibility, right, to talk about these issues. So that's where, it comes from, like, one, being impacted by diet culture growing up. I experienced a lot of oppression, specifically gender oppression and body oppression, being raised in a very traditional Catholic home really impacted how I showed up in the world. And the way that I show up was really being silenced, not having a voice. And when I say not having a voice, I mean by not being able to exert my opinion, to speak up with my elders, because their way was, oh, calladita, no digas nada, be quiet, don't say much, so. And at the school system, you're also dismissed, you're also invisible, and so all that impacted how I showed up in the world. And slowly throughout the years, I would say in the last 15 years, I've been shedding and healing. And, you know, here I am. That's when I say it's hard to show up, because that also means me embracing my voice and showing up in my authentic self, because I wasn't allowed to growing up, and I wasn't allowed to even as a young woman or in the last, like I said, 15 years. So some folks may think, oh, 15 years, that's a long time. I feel like it was yesterday.
yes, yeah.
So I hope that I answer your questions.
Yes, you did. You did. And I think of your story is the story of so many women. And I think where I hear your healing is that you're learning to speak to it. You're learning to name it, to do differently, to treat body different, to speak to body different. Right. I always say food is medicine. And that is a very unpopular opinion.
Yes.
Goes against the stream of diet culture.
Okay.
But with food, it's not just food, it's body, it's how
Mhm.
we show up, it's oppression, it's
Yeah.
culture, it's community, it's family, and it is so complex. And so when you begin to unravel and untangle all of that, it's like this web. And even myself, I'm like, where do you even start when you've
Mhm.
been living this way for so long and you
Yeah.
want to begin the undoing of it and healing? what has that looked like for you in
Mm,
your story? Like, when did you
mm,
know, okay, I'm ready to begin doing something different, or maybe I want to start coloring outside of the lines?
mhm, mm. I always get very emotional when I talk about like my personal experience because there's still so much healing and so many wounds that we carry. And I'm a sociologist, I have a PhD. I can intellectualize and rationalize and talk about systems of oppression. But when you live it, when you go through it growing up, and when you experience that in your education or as a professional,
Mm,
it's very deep, right? So,
yes,
so
yes.
I might cry.
Tears are always welcome. I'm a crier, so.
Yeah, the layer that I want to focus on when we think about the last thing I talk about to folks when I do like workshops or one-on-one coaching or talking to students, the last thing I talk about is food. I talk
Mm,
about everything else systematically that happens in our society and that impact that it has in our well-being and how we show up. And then that has an impact on how we view food, how we treat food, how we consume food, right? So for me, I've always, and I love food. I grew up in a household where I wasn't exposed to a lot of fast food. We didn't eat a lot of fast food. I grew up in a working class, single-headed immigrant household. It was my grandmother. She already passed away 2 years ago, and my aunt who never
mm,
married. And so they were single. So I grew up with two single immigrant women,
mm,
strong, fierce women yet very oppressive. So I experienced a lot of the oppression by them. And when I say the oppression is, they enforce patriarchy in the home through the traditional gender roles. And the oppression was to the point of feeling suffocated of my body, of me being surveilled all the time, of not being allowed to be in sports, to do a lot of things.
mm,
It's like a lot of religious trauma, from the Catholic Church, so the institution of the family and then the institution of religion, where like those were the two main institutions that I felt oppressed growing up. And so the women in my life that loved me are the ones who harm me the most, and I
mhm,
knew at an early age that it was not right, that like what they said to me was not right. I
mm,
didn't have like the language. I would try to speak up, but you're not supposed to speak up to your elders. And I did
yes.
experience the chancla culture, which is where they throw
Mm,
the chancla, the shoe,
yes.
anything that they find. There's the corporal punishment, right?
Mm,
Corporal violence. So I grew up in that sort of home, and I felt caged. I
mm,
felt caged for most of my life, and my escape, think about that. I wanted to run away with they didn't know I had a boyfriend, but I had a boyfriend at that time. I was like, oh yeah, I can't handle this, can't take this anymore, I
mm,
wanted to run
yes.
away,
Yeah.
but I'm glad I didn't. And when I was graduated from high school, I went to the university, and that's where I felt a level of freedom.
Mm,
And by then, I'm like slowly shedding some of that oppression. But growing up and being in that type of environment impacted my body, impacted how I viewed my body, because my body was supposed to be this sacred temple, that I had to save myself for marriage, that my identity was tied to heteronormativity, to male, that marriage, have children, like be a virgin, and then do the traditional gender roles, all those things that, for folks who are fine with that, that's great. You can embrace the traditional gender roles. But in my case, like that's all that was afforded to me, and I wanted more than that. Um, and a trigger warning, I experienced sexual assault when I was 15, and that had a big impact on my body
mhm,
and my
mm,
self-esteem and my relationship with food. And that's where I think I would say, I don't want to say a downhill, but where I began a lot of the guilt and shame, and because I wasn't a virgin anymore. and I
Yeah.
couldn't tell my family that I was sexually assaulted, at that age.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, they took care of me. They try to protect me, and this still happened. Like, can I say bad words in this space or no?
Yes. Oh,
Like,
fuck
what the
yes.
fuck,
Yes.
like I'm not a virgin, like I have no worth,
Mm,
and there's no therapy, there's nothing of that. So I couldn't take all my anger, my frustration, and everything that I was experiencing at home and what had happened to me, that trauma, and what I could control. What can you control? You can control what you eat. You can control
yes.
your body.
Yes.
And that's where it started.
Mm,
That's where it started. And it took many years of healing and actually also accepting that I was sexually assaulted, that was what it had happened to me.
mhm.
And so that's where my passion comes from, because I'm one of so many Latina women, of so many little girls who were like molested, and other things that had happened to me, and parents who may either protect the abuser. There's so many things that happens in our
Yes.
community, and that's why I now speak up. That's why I have a podcast called Dismantling Diet Culture, Fuck Being Calladita, where
Mhm,
I want to normalize these conversations, normalize the conversation that this shit happens at home, and that it's not okay, that we're not fucking broken. What's
mhm.
broken is a system in our society, these institutions, these, very patriarchal, misogynist, sexist, heteronormative values and ideologies that oppress us, and that's where that took me to my college years and eventually therapy. And I really want the audience to know that I didn't start therapy until I got a full-time tenure track job.
Mm,
That I started therapy in my 30s. And by that time I already had my 3 kids. And I knew that I wanted to continue my healing, and show up for my kids and for myself, in my community. But it wasn't until my 30s, because I'm a immigrant first gen. I'm paving the way, getting a career and having health insurance. How many years of my life I was in grad school with student insurance, and so I didn't have access to therapy. And I'm so thankful for therapy. I've had different therapists, and I'm also involved a lot in like indigenous ceremony and in my own indigeneity as part of my own healing. So Western therapy, but also ancestral healing
mhm,
has been central in my healing. And I'm here to tell you that I still don't have shit together. I still struggle with different things, but I keep showing up and I keep being honest, and I say vulnerable, and that's scary, but I feel like
mhm,
my vulnerability has been my superpower, because
mm,
I don't want others to feel alone when I felt alone. And even now, coming out as a queer woman who's married and who has children, has been really hard in the last 5 years.
mm.
And even that, I don't want, and I think about my own students who come out to me and they're writing. So I do it for my students. I do it for those Latinas who are struggling, who are like, I like women, or I don't know what's going on. I
Mhm,
want to give them the language, and I want to tell them you're normal, you're okay. I don't
mhm,
want them to wait until their 30s or 40s,
mhm,
So
mm.
this is where I am. I'm still in this journey and still showing up as a mother, as a community member, as a health coach, as, everything, all the
Yeah.
messiness.
Yeah. Well, and life is a mess. And
Hmm.
I appreciate your vulnerability and your bravery. And I think of all of the young women, even the young Latina women that I work with. And yeah, you are not alone in your story. And um, as women, especially food and sexuality are
Oof.
so tied.
Oh, yes.
Um, there is a huge parallel between
Mhm.
even sexual assault,
Mhm.
molestation, and disordered eating because you're
Yes.
when you're like, that's the one thing I could
Mhm.
control, I was like, yes, that's
Mhm.
100%. And you need that power and control when you're living in an environment that feels so chronically unsafe and out
Mhm.
of your control. And yeah, the oppression and harm that is caused by the colonization of religion for
Yes.
assimilation. I mean, to survive,
Yes.
like, I hear your story and I just think about your auntie and your grandmother, like they were surviving, they were assimilating,
Mhm.
and they harmed through that,
Yes.
through holding a
Yes.
system that
Mhm.
helped them do that. And
Yeah.
so like you weren't able to have autonomy, be your
Mhm.
own human.
Mhm.
That was harmful, and I'm so sorry.
Mm.
And I,
Mm. Thank you. Thank you.
yeah.
I appreciate your words, and it's coming to terms that I say in the last 5 years, like being able to hold space for the grief and for all the mixed emotions, that it's okay that I can like love and appreciate my grandmother and my aunt and also acknowledge the harm that they caused me and what am I willing to do in my healing and what kind of relationship do I want to have with them, you know?
Mhm.
So yeah, and understanding that they were enforcing what they thought was best, you know, it's not to justify what they did, it's okay, but to intellectually understand, you know, what's happening and how these systems work and how women perpetuate, right, and enforce
Mhm.
misogyny and patriarchy and the harm that it has. And now, you know, I'm in my 40s, and because of my own healing, like my healing is directly tied to the collective healing, healing my lineage. I think about the women in my life, my ancestors who weren't able to speak up, who weren't able to cry, and my grandmother and my aunt are two examples of women who had to, quote, be strong. And being strong is don't show your emotions, don't cry, you know, don't tear up. And when my grandmother passed away 2 years ago, she was like my mother because she raised me in this country.
Mhm.
It was I felt that I had lost who I was. Like it was
Mhm.
so intense and so painful and excruciating of losing my grandmother. It's like losing my mother. But at the same time, it was letting go of who I was with her as heterosexual, who she knew me. And that was so fucking hard and powerful and scary. I was like, oh shit, there's no fucking turning back. Like, it's now, like Hortencia, it's now, like you need to start coming out. Otherwise, you're not gonna survive. Like I was at the
Yeah.
darkest. I was, you know, I had suicidal ideation for years because I
Mhm.
was struggling with my identity, even me accepting myself and the shame and the fucking religious fucking trauma of, you know, like, fuck, it fucked me up in so many ways, you know?
Mhm.
And so going in this journey, I thought upon my ancestors. That's why like ancestral healing is so powerful. And
Mhm.
that's what colonialism took away. It's
Mhm.
reclaiming my queerness and reclaiming my ancestors who were queer, who were not allowed to be. How many women in my lineage? Who knows? And here I am, the first to be fuck this shit like I'm queer. This is who I am, you know? It wasn't easy. It was not easy. You have no idea. This is 2024 has been my intentional year of finding joy and pleasure in my life because for the
Mhm.
last 4 years, it has been, I wouldn't say darkness, but it has been really, really
Mhm.
hard to show up. You know, I would not be here with you today if it wasn't for that ancestral healing of my ancestors,
Mhm.
reminding myself why, like, why me after having gone through so much, like, and here now this, like, what the fuck, this is too much. And my
Yes.
ancestors said, it's you're breaking these these um these chains of oppression and not being able to be who you are, you know, like having that deep connection and realization has been part of my healing. So I'm doing it for me and for my ancestors and for future generations, my future. They say that we're healing our previous generations and 7 generations ahead. And I believe that. And if I have been the one to be called upon to do this work, it's been really hard, but here I am. I'm
Mhm.
doing it. And that's the meaning. And I don't think people realize, obviously, on social media, okay, why do I do this work? Well, it is because it's my life. This is my life.
Yeah.
My it's my life's mission.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. 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 They say 7 generations back and 7 generations forward. And I hear you in that what you share around feeling that darkness and really struggling to figure out identity can be one of the hardest journeys one will make. And yeah, the women in my family always showed up very angry, like very strong and very angry. And so that grief work of, I don't want to be angry anymore,
Hmm.
and you as a mother, I imagine that showed up with your children
I'm
all
so
the
mad.
time. Like I like this is not the way I want to parent, or I don't want to parent the way that I was parented.
Right.
Can be really hard. And seeking that joy really is indicative of where we are in our healing. And so I'm glad to hear that you're able to hold space for that joy in life, because it's really hard to choose that actively
Ooh.
every
Mm.
day.
Mm.
Um, and some days you don't. Like for
Hmm.
me, some days I'm like, oh, I'm my fourth generation back, and I'm in my rage, and I'm angry at everything. And then I just remind myself of like, no,
Hmm.
you are the one that has chosen to heal so
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
you can have joy.
Yes,
Um,
yes. I love how you've framed it as it's a choice, right, that we make, and it's true. And joy and happiness, you can't have that all day. It's like I feel like these are like moments, pockets throughout the day, and can we be intentional to find it even when we're grieving what's happening in the world, right? How can we continue to show up for ourselves, take care of ourselves, find joy so that we can show up for the world too, for others, right? And I want to make the intersection and the connection between like folks oftentimes think like, well, I'm in my own individual food and body image healing. Yes, but please know that this is connected to the community, that this is connected to the global. Like your individual healing is community healing. And I would not be able to do a lot of the work that I'm currently doing if it wasn't for the healing. I've created new courses at my institution. I have many, but two that are significant related to this work is Sociology of Food, Culture, and Society.
mm,
This course came about because of the work that I've been doing on social media. I say like, how can we bring equity to the classroom and also to our community or folks who don't have access to formal education, right? So that has been one of the ways. Another one that took longer, but I've learned that the creator has its divine timing, that the universe aligns things exactly when, and sometimes we just need to trust the process. Because I was in such a dark place for several years, I always wanted to create a course on Latina sexualities. Like I created a
mm,
sociology of gender course, a while back, but I could not, because you talked about the intersection of like food and sexuality and body.
mhm,
And
mhm,
I always knew that this was something I wanted to create, and I couldn't. I couldn't because I was not in my healing. I was not where I needed to be. And I'm really just excited to share with you that this spring semester at my institution, Latina Sexualities was approved through my curriculum committee, and now it's going to go to the state level. And I am excited that this new course will be offered probably in the spring of 2025. It's going to be the first course offered in the history of my institution, like Sociology of Latina Sexualities, where I want to talk about these issues, the taboos that we're not allowed to talk about and explore growing up. I want to bring healing in the classroom. I want to decolonize the classroom through my work. And this would not have been possible if I hadn't done the work, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And let's say like maybe I didn't do the work and still created the course, it wouldn't have the same meaning, and I think as powerful as it's going to be because of what I've been through. So that's another way that we give back to the community, that you're a better person for your family, for your community, and for your profession.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I had a thought and then I lost it, so I'm gonna come back to it eventually. Um, uh, I am really, first of all, I'm so excited that you're creating space to have these really difficult conversations. And not only that, but you're changing systems, educational systems, systems that
Yeah.
are built
Hmm.
through systematic colonization and oppression, especially with women of color, Latinx, queer.
Hmm.
Um, I'm curious for, I'm always kind of thinking through the lens of those I work with, and I think of what trauma does to us and um, how we often will live out of isolation or out of our own shame.
Mm.
And you have had the privilege of stepping back into ancestral healing and community healing. What
Yeah.
would you say for folks who don't have access to higher education, don't have access to community?
Hmm.
How can they maybe even invite this idea of community or
Yes.
healing, whether we're talking about food, body,
Hmm.
sexuality,
Hmm.
community, ancestral, like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. One is, I think it's so easy for us to withdraw, right, from our social support system that we may have. Either I know that there must be at least one person in your life that you trust. Identify who's that one person, and you only need one person to start. When
Mm,
I was struggling, um, a colleague from the community, from the LGBTQ community, said, "Who do you trust? Can you come out to someone in your family?" And no, I can't. Like, she's like, there must be one person. I'm like, oh yeah, my sister. There's
mm,
one of my sisters that I trust enough. And so it's like, can you identify one person that you feel safe, that you can share what you're struggling, what you're going through? And because if we withdraw and go into darkness, that's scary, and we don't want, we need you, alive. We need your gifts and talents for the world. So it requires a choice to make, and that choice requires energy. And when you're depressed and suicidal, you don't have energy to you don't even want to talk to anyone, right? So
mhm,
finding one person to talk to, if you believe in God and a higher being and the creator, whatever it is, hold on to that. That's what do you have right now in your life that you can hold on to, that you can tap into? Can you connect with nature, right? We all have access to air. We all have different quality of
mhm.
air, right? But we have access to some level of exposure of Mother Earth, connecting to the soil, connecting to the land, going back to our ancestral practices. And as you will know, going back to our ancestral practices don't cost anything. It's free.
Mm,
it
mm,
it totally is away from capitalism. So finding your spirituality or religion, if that's something that works out, finding a support system. And community looks different for everyone, and what might be community for some folks might be different for others, and we can have multiple intersecting communities, right? So
mm,
what are they? Is it in your workplace? Is it friends? Is it in the community? Is it in your neighborhood? Or who are these folks? And if you can't find it, We need to create it. That's what I tell my students. When you transfer to university, don't expect that there might be community. You might have to be the one creating that community. And so
Hmm.
that might be the case too. And I know that takes time and energy. I mean, you may not have the bandwidth, and if it's you're not ready, you're not ready. But finding that social support system is very important. And learning to treat yourself with a lot of love and a lot of self-compassion and non-judgment. Oh my God, that's the hardest. And getting rid of the
Yeah.
fucking shame, because the shame was dimming my light. The shame was making me basically like I was dying. I was literally dying. I was dying. And until I began shedding that and rewriting and reframing my thoughts, that I feel like I was shedding, that coming out to close people in my life is what saved me. Coming
Mm,
out has just saved my life, and I'm more outspoken, and I need to continue, because that's the way that I get rid of the shame that I still continue to carry for being queer, for still being heterosexual, for still being married legally, co-parenting, there's still so much shame, but the
mhm,
more I talk about it, the more I'm healing, and the more that I am allowing myself to be who I am, and
mhm,
and to do it in safe spaces, right? To
mhm,
do it with people that you trust, that what you share, it's not going to be used against you,
mhm.
because unfortunately that happens too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Long-winded answer.
I love it. I'm like, I'm here at your podcast. Take control. I'm just witnessing. I love it. Say all the things. Yes, yeah, wow. You were so powerful, and I just feel incredibly grateful to be able to witness that. Because in your 30s, shit is hard. Like,
Yeah.
you're a mother of 3, like, you already have so much on your plate, and then you're like, "You know what? I think I'm gonna work on all my trauma." Like, just gonna add that to my plate. And people will often start therapy thinking like, "Oh, it's gonna make me feel better." And I always tell people like, "No, you're gonna feel like shit. You're gonna
Mhm.
feel awful. You're gonna hate me. You're gonna come into sessions and like
Mhm.
literally curse my name
Mhm.
because it's going to get so dark and so heavy because we
Mhm.
have to go backwards before we can go forwards." Uh,
Yeah.
so
Mhm.
even that idea of reworking is hard. So it's just very incredible that you were able to really recognize within yourself what you needed, and you trusted that intuition of reaching out to that one person, your sister, or reaching out to that therapist, or reaching out to community, and trusting that
Mhm.
that is what you needed at
Mhm.
that time. You talk about divine timing,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Um, I often will look for signs. So for me, it's often in sevens, and often it comes in birds. So
Mhm.
um, even the other day, I had an experience, and it was that like reminder of like, oh, okay, like we're in
Mhm.
that season of
Mhm.
transition. It's happening. Change is happening. Like, what else am I looking for? Um, so understanding that deeper connection to nature, to the land, to belief, tradition. And it's crazy too. I sit with a lot of folks who don't know where they come from,
Mhm.
right? There's this distance, or there's so much lateral oppression that it's so unsafe to be
Mhm.
connected to people,
Yeah.
or identity, especially for me as an mixed indigenous woman. Oftentimes there's a lot of complexities that can impact connection.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. And
yeah.
sometimes and it's important. Thank you for saying that. I think also like that you have the right, and you don't need to justify your social distancing from family members who harmed you. You know that there's a lot of that guilt from family and others, like that you're a bad, son or daughter.
Mhm,
It is, but you don't have to have those relationships, those bonds, just
mhm,
because it's family related by blood. Family is also based on emotional ties. So
mhm,
I think that's liberating too,
mhm.
to know that you can have like chosen family.
Yeah. Well, and especially with Latinx, any real, like any BIPOC community, there's
Mm,
like this such a strong sense of responsibility, not only for ourselves, but for community, but for our family. So it's not just, and I hear that some in what you're sharing, like it's not just, my healing is not just for me, but it's for community. And s- in my experience, some of that community is like, they're not ready to hold that. So,
yeah.
or even family, most of
Mm-hmm.
my family is like not ready to hold that. So it
Yeah.
is that figuring out like what can I come close to, what
Mm-hmm.
traditions or practices do I still have access to?
Mm-hmm.
And you named so much, and I love that. It's lovely because it is this grounded sense of control and power. Like, oh, I can access these things if I choose to,
Mm-hmm.
versus maybe what we want in an ideal world, which isn't always possible. Like I
Mm-hmm.
would love to be back on my family's land, and unfortunately,
Yeah.
my family is still on my family's land, right? Like you can't
Yeah.
have one without the
Yes.
other.
Yeah.
So it's like
Mm-hmm.
figuring out boundaries or
Mm-hmm.
figuring out other ways to get that need met of
Mm-hmm.
I want to be able to have access to my homeland, my
Mm-hmm.
land, and I am no longer allowing myself or my body to be harmed anymore. So that means that I need to figure out new community or new places or new people to be able to do the things that do serve me and do give me rest and healing, and keep moving me forward in that idea of 7 generations. And
Mm-hmm.
that's hard. And I hear you creating that even in higher education, at the institution you're working at, the people that you're working with, like you are finding those veins, that are healthy and thriving.
Mm. So beautiful what you said. Mm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'm curious, there's so much wisdom in what you've shared, but I'm thinking of a couple people specifically, um, for the young Latinas that are struggling with that sense of family responsibility, with that sense of food and religion and assimilation and colonization and culture. And up here in the Pacific Northwest, we are very white washed.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, like,
Mm-hmm.
don't even get me started, but especially in
Mm-hmm.
Spokane. But
Yeah.
so the level of oppression is just insane. California, there's a lot more opportunity and a lot more
Mhm.
uh
There's
just
pockets, it's pockets,
yes.
too, but yeah, but overall,
Hmm.
yeah, it's pretty
Hmm.
liberal.
Yeah, like when I fly back to
Progressive.
California, I'm like, oh, I'm hearing like 12 different languages and there's
Ah, the
so much
food.
diversity. The
Oh,
food, I
mm,
can eat
mm.
whatever the fuck I
Oh
want.
my
Up here,
God,
it's
Bay
like,
Area has the best food. My goodness. Mm.
yes, yes. Yeah, up here it's like, yeah. Spokane was actually a test city for fast food. So in the 80s, it
Wow.
was filled with fast food because the idea was like if it can survive here, it can survive anywhere. So you get
Mhm.
a lot of that culture where people are still very disconnected from food and it's very highly processed. And we're getting a little bit better with like farm to table, like in California, small farms, stuff like that.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
culturally, Spokane is still very much growing into this idea of like food matters, health
Yeah.
matters.
Mhm.
Um, that was a side quest, but anywho, what would you tell young Latina women, Latinx women, um, in their journey to become connected to body, to food?
Yeah.
Like, where do they start if they're still living at home under that oppression, under that
Mm, yeah.
patriarchy? Like,
Yeah. What I tell my students, I feel very privileged to have a profession that is a passion, that I don't even see as a job. And I tell my students the first day, like, I'm not your typical professor, my pedagogy, the way I teach is very different. And I invite them to be curious. So I'm inviting your audience and this, young Latina or older Latina is like to be curious about what internalized stories have you have about your body, about yourself, about your identity. Like, what did you grow up believing? Like, it's like doing an inventory. Be curious without judgment. Like, let's do an inventory of, like, what did I grow up hearing about food? What did I grow up hearing about my body, about the body of other people? Like, without judgment, just like being observant and curious and writing that down, or reflecting in nature, and then reflecting on, like, how much of this have I internalized? Because the way that we view our bodies, the ways that we treat our body and what we eat, that there's a lot of social conditioning. It's our socialization. We were not born to hate our bodies. We were not born to be scared and feel guilty for
mm,
eating and feeling shame for eating. you know that that comes externally. So we need to identify, where does this harm come from? And it's hard. That's the healing, right? And that's fucking hard, because then you realize, oh shit, it was this person, or it was this happened to me, and all this other stuff. And it's like you're opening a can of worms. So not everyone is willing and able to. That's why I say it's like unpopular. Not a lot of people want to do this work. You want to stay in the superficial. I want to lose weight. I want to do this, that. Superficial. Doing the inner work, the work that people don't see, that's the hard work. And that's scary. And I feel we do need to do it. And again, divine timing, it also depends on where you're at in your life. What resources do you have? I invite, if this is a young Latina college student, what are the resources in your campus? Mental health resources, therapy, find a safe space, clubs, organizations in your campus, and therapy, and any other stuff that is non-Western that can help you in your healing. Like, I wish someone would have told me that when I was a college student. Like, have you considered going to therapy? Or, like, I had no idea. Like, I didn't even
mhm,
know the resources are tapped in. I was this quiet Latina, first gen surviving undergraduate and then PhD. So, and again, in the community, there's so many nonprofit organizations that offer free resources and workshops in person and online, like, looking into that if you are willing and you want to embark in this journey. And, I have a lot of free resources on my social media platform, content that I create, or I have a guide that's about moving away from food and body shaming, and how to engage in those conversations with family, how to set boundaries from a culturally relevant. So there's so many free resources that people can tap into, and then they can continue, of course, listening to your own podcast as a resource.
mm,
My podcast, like, surround yourself and create your own bank of supportive resources and networks.
mhm, mhm. Well, thank you. That's very helpful. I imagine they will think so too. Um, I feel like I can't end without knowing your favorite meal. I feel like I
Oh my
want
gosh.
I want to know, like, what is
That's a
your
tough
favorite meal,
question.
or what is like your go-to, like, let's
Yeah.
say you have a busy day, like,
Yeah.
what is nourishing to you?
Can I tell you, like, my food staples that are a must in my home? And then,
Fuck
like,
yes.
my
Yes.
favorite one is I still can't answer that question. It's always hard. So definitely you will always find tortillas in my home, beans and rice. And, even though ancestrally, like, cheese, dairy, that's the colonizer, but, you can find queso in my home. So those basic food
Mhm.
staples, you always find that. So Like my emergency food sometimes will be like a burrito, it's
Mhm.
like with the fiber with the beans and it has protein, so like that, like quesadillas, those are like fast
Mhm.
meals.
Mhm.
Like my favorite cultural food, I I love pozole and I love enchiladas. Yeah,
Yes.
but there's and not like your restaurant enchiladas. It's like they're made by my aunt. There's this particular way that they're made,
Yeah.
and so enchiladas and pozole, those are the two things that I love. But I think I love enchiladas more than pozole. So maybe in the future, if I come back, I can tell you. But those are the two of my culture foods.
Totally. Pozole is like my favorite like comfort food. Like it's kind of cold outside and I'm like, oh
Yeah.
yes, please. All the toppings, all the stuff. It's so good.
Yeah.
Yes. Lovely. Well, thank you for sharing. Thank you for being willing to be vulnerable today,
Mm.
sharing your story. It is powerful. It's full of wisdom. You are creating a path, not only for yourself, but for so many other people. So I
Mm.
just want to say, like, please keep doing what you're doing. It's needed. It is
Mm.
so needed.
Thank you. Thank you. I always feel I get the strength to be honest and vulnerable and raw when I'm invited to just share my story. And then it's like, oh my God, it's out there. It's out there. It's in the web. It's on the podcast. And then I just remind myself again, someone needed to hear my message, you know?
Yes.
And that's what I think about. And I have the skills, the strategies, the support system, the therapy to take care of myself for any backlash, for any trolls, anything, just, because I'm still vulnerable and exposed to other things, but I'm in a different place in my life. So I'm willing to, and I say risk and be honest and share vulnerable things because someone needs to hear it. And then I can take care of myself, like decompress, like after this, cry if I need to, like take care of myself so that I can continue to show up.
Yeah. Well, I hope that you do take care of yourself after this.
Yes.
I'm probably gonna go sit in some sunshine, get toasty. It's fucking cold in here. But I just want to say thank you to everyone who tuned in, and I will be posting all of the resources and places where you can follow up with Hortencia. And my hope is that you do, because there's a lot of goodness and a lot of richness in your work. So, yeah,
Thank you. Thank you so much for the
yes,
invitation and for the
of
audience.
course,
Thank you. Please support
of
my work.
course.
Follow my Instagram,
Yes,
follow my podcast,
yes,
share this episode with others. That's the best gift that we can get.
yes, yes. So, all right. Thank you. I will hopefully stay connected sooner rather
For
than later.
sure.
I had some post thoughts, so I'll reach out.
Absolutely. Thank you.